What's going on, you guys? My name's Ty Knots and welcome to Top 5 Unknowns. 5 scariest 3 a.m. stories from Reddit. Number 5. This happened a year ago. My family was all asleep at 3 a.m. when I awoke to scratching at the front door. I peeked through the windows to find a beaten, bloody young woman sitting cross-legged on my front steps staring back at me. It was my neighbor. Her left eye was swollen shut and she had a laceration on her head. I opened the door and tried to get her to come inside. She was extremely drunk and hardly wearing anything on this winter, windy, rainy day. She was babbling and not making any sense. I called 911, but when she realized I was calling for help, she screamed and climbed over my chain link fence, flopping onto the ground. She ran down the street, flailing her arms and screaming. I thought her boyfriend had beat her up. They'd had known domestic violence issues, but come to find out, earlier that day she got rip-roaring drunk, then tripped and hit her head on the concrete. The laceration on her head actually had stitches in it already, which I couldn't see in the dark. When she got home from the ER, she stole her roommate's whiskey and pounded most of the bottle. Then she just went berserk. It was such a freaky night. Number 4. When I was about 10 years old, my brother and I were home alone one night when my parents went out for a few hours. We were both sitting in the living room relaxing when all of a sudden we hear a barely audible voice coming from down the hall. We both just looked at each other and froze, making sure we'd both heard it, but we were too scared to check it out. A couple minutes of silence went by, but then suddenly we heard it again. Only this time we heard it much more clearly because we were paying a lot more attention. It was a voice, but there was something weird about the way it sounded. We couldn't really understand it, almost like it was speaking some kind of gibberish. My brother got up and stepped into the hallway and I reluctantly followed. He called out hello and then listened for movement, but absolutely nothing. We carefully walked further down the hallway to where we had heard it and looked around. No signs of anyone. We looked around a bit more and then started to walk back into the living room when suddenly we heard it again right behind us, making me jump. But we realized it didn't sound like a person inside the house. It was almost like it was coming through a walkie-talkie or something. Like when there aren't any low or high frequencies in a sound, just staticky, distorted mids. And still, it was speaking in some weird language I couldn't place. We looked at each other, now more puzzled than scared, but my kid brain started coming up with all sorts of creepy explanations. Maybe there is someone in the house, but they left their walkie-talkie out somewhere and an accomplice was communicating from the outside, asking if we were alone so they could come in and sack the place. We kept looking around the area and were completely stumped as to what was producing the sound. When it happened again, we realized it was coming from directly above where we were standing. We looked up and saw a fire alarm with a small flashing red light. Turns out, it was just trying to tell us to charge the battery, but the language was set to French. Number 3. A few years ago, I think I was maybe 18, I was in a really bad situation as far as living goes and I like to take really long walks out at night. One night, I was in a field at about 3 a.m. and saw an owl perched on top of a tree. It eyed me for a good minute and a half before taking off. Owls have always made me uneasy, so I decided to head home. On the way back, on the darkest road possible, 2 dogs came up to the street to my right. At first, I thought they were wolves. They really looked like it, but one of them was solid black and the other was solid white. They didn't look at me and they didn't approach me. They just stood at the edge of the road as I walked by. For some reason, I was absolutely terrified. I just kept looking straight ahead as well. After I passed, they started walking across the street behind me and just kept on going. Now I know this doesn't sound scary to most people, but my late father and I are native Indians, and it's very reminiscent of an old story he once told me about. More of an eye-opener than a suspenseful night, but I don't remember ever being that scared before or after that. It kind of makes you wonder if it may be some sort of distant, deceased relative or something trying to make contact. Who knows? Number 2. When I was probably 13, my cousin and I decided to play with an old Ouija board. I lived with my grandparents and my room was in the attic. There were a bunch of built-in bookcases that housed miscellaneous stuff that I never bothered to clear out when I moved into the room. One of the things on that bookshelf was my grandmother's music box. It was a small, plain box, and when you opened it, it had a ballerina that would twirl around with the music. But it was so old that it just didn't work anymore. For years, I'd pick it up from time to time and open it, but the music wouldn't play and the ballerina wouldn't budge. Anyway, my cousin and I, we decided to try to contact spirits with the Ouija board, just messing around like little kids do because we were bored. We sat Indian style on the floor with the board between us and asked, are there any spirits with us? There was no answer. If there was, we would have known because we were both kind of pushing the planchette around trying to freak each other out, just laughing and messing around. We may have asked a few more questions and then we decided to get serious. We swore to each other that neither of us would move the piece, no more laughing, and we tried to be reverent and we'd ask another question. So we ask, if there's a spirit with us right now, can you give us a sign? All of a sudden, sitting 5 feet away from us, the music box started playing. My cousin and I both booked it out of my room and down the stairs. I don't remember anything else weird happening in the days that followed, but I was afraid to be in my room alone for a long time after that. To this day, it's probably the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that's ever happened to either of us. We'll never forget it. Number 1. At the time, I had a bedroom on the top floor of the house with a skylight right above my bed. I loved the skylight because you could see the stars and the moon and the occasional meteor. Anyway, one night around 3 a.m., I was awakened by the most hellish noise and I could see through the window that the trees outside were dancing in the wind. Suddenly, a blinding light came through the skylight and the whole room was filled with a bluish color. I had no idea what was going on. Was it the end of the world? Did Jesus come back to get me? Then I realized the hellish noise was a helicopter and the light was one of those searchlights that they use. I know those are common in cities, but I lived in a very rural area. The light clicked off and the helicopter just flew away. The next morning, I heard from the sheriff's deputy that a man had broken into a house a mile or so away, had injured the homeowner, then run off into the night, so they were searching in the woods and nearby farms with the helicopter and light on. I never heard anything else from it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos.